and even take away my life. But do not know why am I the faith I learned at your feet.
Before we begin, I want you to imagine this for a moment. A young man far from home, torn from his land, separated from his family, living in an empire that did not respect the God he had learned to fear since childhood. A young man with everything he needed to adapt, to remain silent, to blend in and survive. But he did the opposite. He decided he would rather die than deny his faith. And that decision changed not only his life, but crossed centuries, reached us and continues to confront consciences to this day. Because the question that Daniel's story poses to us is not old. It is current. What would you do if obeying God put your own life at risk? How far will your faith go when following the truth comes at too high a cost? Daniel wasn't a movie hero. He didn't have superpowers. He was young. He was afraid. He missed home. But there was something about him that is rarely seen these days: conviction. A faith that was non-negotiable. A faith that didn't adapt to the system. A faith that didn't accept shortcuts. It's easy to talk about faith when everything is going well. It's easy to praise when no one threatens, when there are no consequences. But Daniel lived his faith at a time when living seemed impossible. He didn't just face lions. He faced social pressure, political manipulation, fear of death, and the loneliness of someone who chooses to stand while everyone else bows down. And I imagine Daniel looking inside himself, perhaps silently, perhaps with a racing heart, and saying something like, "I can lose everything except my God. If I deny who I am before Him, what good is it to continue living?" This is not just a biblical story. It's a mirror. A mirror that shows how accustomed we've become to negotiating values, silencing truths, and calling it wisdom. Daniel reminds us that there are times when surviving is not living, and that dying faithful can be more honorable than living kneeling before idols. Throughout this video, we will journey through Daniel's life, understand the historical, spiritual, and human context of this extreme decision, and reflect on what this story teaches us today. Not as a distant tale, but as a call to action. Because faith that is not tested has never been true faith. If this story has already begun to resonate with you, if on some level you feel that you too live surrounded by pressure to deny what you believe in, then stay with me until the end. What Daniel experienced can strengthen you more than you imagine. Daniel's story did not begin as a famous man or a respected prophet. He began as a young man defeated in the eyes of men. Jerusalem had fallen. The temple had been looted. The people were humiliated. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, decided to take the most intelligent, healthy, and promising young men of Judah to his palace. The idea was simple and cruel: to erase their identity and rebuild them in the image of the empire. Daniel was among those young people, probably still a teenager. He didn't choose to be there. He didn't choose to learn another language, study another culture, eat another food, receive another name. All of this was imposed upon him. And here lies a great lesson. True faith is not born when we choose the setting. It reveals itself when we are thrown into scenarios we would never choose. The first attempt to break Daniel wasn't through violence, but through subtlety. They changed his name. Daniel, which meant, "God is my judge," became Belteshazzar, a name linked to a pagan god. This wasn't just bureaucracy. It was symbolic. It was an attempt to say, now you belong to another system, to another god, to another truth. How many times throughout history has the world tried to do the same to people of faith? Not by taking the Bible from their hands, but by changing the meaning of things. Calling sin progress. Calling obedience backwardness. Calling faithfulness fanaticism. The method hasn't changed. It's just become more sophisticated. After the name came the food. The king's table was lavish, luxurious, desirable. But that food was consecrated to idols. For many, accepting it would be merely a formality. A detail. A small price to pay to survive and prosper. But Daniel understood something that many ignore: faithfulness begins with small decisions. He who learns to yield in little things, sooner or later yields in much. Daniel decided in his heart not to defile himself. That phrase is powerful. He decided before the final pressure arrived. Before the direct threat. Before the lion's den. The faith that sustains us in great trials is built on the silent decisions of everyday life. He didn't make a speech. He didn't attack the system. He wasn't arrogant. He spoke with respect, with wisdom, with gentleness. And God honored that attitude. Those young men, who refused the king's table, didn't become weak as expected. They became stronger, more lucid, more prepared. Here we learn another ancient truth: obeying God never impoverishes a person, even when it seems to cost everything. Time passed, and Daniel grew in wisdom and discernment. While kings succeeded one another, empires rose and fell, Daniel remained. He did not remain because he was merely politically skilled, but because he possessed something rare: integrity. In an environment where everyone sought personal gain, Daniel could not be accused of corruption, lying, or betrayal. This bothered him.
Lord, into your hands I place my breath. If this is my final night, let it be lived in your presence.
It always bothered him. Loyalty exposes mediocrity. The light disturbs those who have become accustomed to the shadows. And then came the conspiracy. The men who couldn't find fault with Daniel's conduct decided to attack his faith. They knew exactly where to strike. They knew Daniel wouldn't compromise his devotion. They created an absurd law: for 30 days, no one could make requests to any god or man, except to the king. Anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into the lion's den. The decree was signed. Legal. Official. Irrevocable according to the laws of the Medes and Persians. Daniel knew about the decree. This detail is crucial. He wasn't caught off guard. He knew. He understood the consequences. And yet, he did what he always did. He opened the windows. He turned toward Jerusalem. He knelt down. He prayed. He didn't pray to provoke. He prayed because he didn't know how to live without it. Prayer wasn't an act of political rebellion, it was an act of spiritual survival. To take prayer away from Daniel would be like taking the breath away from a man. Here is an uncomfortable question for our times. If prayer were forbidden today, there would be sufficient evidence against us. Or is our faith so silent that it would go unnoticed? Daniel was denounced, arrested, brought before the king. Darius liked Daniel. He tried to save him. He spent the whole day looking for a loophole in the law. But he couldn't. The same system that Daniel had served now condemned him. This also teaches us something harsh. Doing the right thing doesn't always save us from immediate injustice. When thrown into the lion's den, Daniel did not make a final public appeal. He did not curse his accusers. He did not question God aloud. The biblical text is silent, and this silence is profound. There are times when faith does not shout. It simply trusts. That den wasn't symbolic. Those were real lions. Hungry. Trained to kill. Death there wasn't quick. It was brutal. Humanly speaking, there was no escape. But while Daniel was in the lion's den, something extraordinary happened. God didn't take Daniel out of the den. God went in with him. An angel shut the lions' mouths. What seemed like a death sentence was transformed into a testimony. When the king returned in the morning, he did not call out arrogantly, but in anguish. "Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel's answer was not one of pride, but of faithfulness. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths." Daniel emerged unscathed. No wounds. No marks. Faith not only preserved him, it glorified God before the entire empire. Those who accused him were thrown into the den and did not have the same protection. Not because God is cruel, but because wickedness always falls into the trap it builds. Daniel's story is not about lions. It's about perseverance. It's about someone who was the same faithful young man in the palace kitchen, the same upright man in the corridors of power, and the same obedient servant in the face of death. Daniel teaches us that true faith does not depend on the environment. It survives in exile, thrives in persecution, and endures when everything around it crumbles. He preferred to risk his life rather than lose his soul. He preferred to die faithful rather than live denying that which gave meaning to his existence. In times when everything is negotiable, Daniel remains an uncomfortable yet necessary reminder. There are values that don't age. There are principles that don't adapt. There are truths that don't change, even when the whole world changes around us. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: God continues to honor those who honor Him. Not always by delivering them from the pit, but always by sustaining them within it. Because faith that endures to the end is never in vain. If this story resonated with you, I want to ask you something simple, but very important. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write a comment below. It doesn't even need to be long. Just a sentence saying what touched your heart most in this story will do. This helps the video reach more people who also need to hear this message. Now, before concluding, I want to offer a sincere reflection, from heart to heart. Daniel's story doesn't end in the lion's den. It continues every time someone chooses to remain faithful even when it costs them comfort, acceptance, or security. Daniel didn't live in an easier world than ours. On the contrary, he lived in a system that tried to extinguish his faith every day, slowly and cleverly. And yet, he remained the same. This confronts us. Because today no one is throwing us into a den of lions, but we are pressured to deny values all the time. To silence truths. To adapt so as not to be seen as different. And little by little, many are bowing down without realizing it. Daniel reminds us that faith is not a pretty speech, nor a religious outward appearance. Faith is a daily decision. It is what we do when no one is watching. It is what we choose when obeying God seems to put us at a disadvantage. Perhaps you are living in your own personal pit. A hostile environment. A silent pressure. A fear of losing something important if you remain faithful. If so, remember this: God did not abandon Daniel that night. And He does not abandon today those who choose to remain steadfast. The world changes. Systems pass. Empires fall. But faithfulness continues to have value in the eyes of God. And in the end, that is what remains. Thank you for staying until the end. May Daniel's courage strengthen your faith. And may you, when your time comes to choose, also find the strength to stand firm.